Hello friends, welcome to Odd Socks and Spontaneity. My name is Mel and today we are going to be learning how to make basic sourdough bread. I've been making sourdough for a little over a year now. When I started, I couldn't get my head around it. What's a starter and how do you mix it? What's a stretch and fold? What's a banneton basket and a lamb? And there's all these things that I just didn't know what they were. There was so much information and I found it really overwhelming. But what I did find is once I had started making it, I made a few loaves and they were terrible. But I started to understand the process, then I could tweak what I was making, and I now make pretty consistently good loaves, and I would like to share that process with you. So I'm going to be sharing a very simple process today. I'm not going to break down too much of the science. Let's just start with the basics. I plan on making more videos on each aspect of the sourdough process and going into a little bit more depth. But this video today is for if you have never made it before, if you don't know anything about it, you've come to the right place. Into it, it's 100 grams of starter there. Now I always mix my water with my starter first because I find it is easier to combine it. So we mix that all together. So I source my flour from a local refillery store. And I love it, it's consistent, but you use what you need to use. So I use rye flour for my starter and I use plain white flour for everything else that I do. And then I will add in my 100 grams of rye. So you'll notice that I have done equal parts of each of these things. So 100 of each. Now that will rise pretty quickly because it's got quite a lot of food. So the flour is the food for the starter. It's what it feeds off and the water helps activate that. If you want it to rise a bit slower, so say you're going to make sourdough tomorrow morning, before you go to bed tonight, you might do that at a 1:5 ratio, so 1 part starter. So for example, 20 grams of starter and then 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water, and that'll take a bit longer for it to work through all of its food, because if it gets to the point where it's doubled and then starts collapsing, you've left it for too long. So depending on where you are with the climate and how warm it is, that will affect things. So I use a different ratio at different times of year, but just start with 1 to 1 to 1 and take it from there. But I'll mark a line on the bowl as to where it is so that I can visually see. You can use a rubber band if you're using a jar, so that I can see how much it has risen. And I'm going to put a plate on top of that, and that's my starter that is done. Easy peasy. So we've made up our starter. What else do we need? I'm going to talk about equipment. Steam is such an important concept in baking bread because without it, the loaf will harden before it can finish rising and you get flat, pretty pathetic. You'd be quite disappointed with those loaves. So we need to create steam. So I use, now where have I put it? I use a Dutch oven, which is basically 2 cast iron fry pans put together. I preheat that in the oven and I bake my bread in there. I can bake 2 small loaves in here, but usually it's just 1 standard size loaf. However, if you don't have a Dutch oven, you simply need a casserole dish with a lid. I have used my fry pan because it's designed to go in the oven and it has a lid, but I didn't really like it and it wasn't quite high enough for the loaves to rise really well. If you don't have a dish, an oven-proof dish with a lid, what you need to do is put a roasting tray in the bottom of the oven that you're going to put some ice cubes in when you put your bread in. So that's on the bottom shelf. On the middle shelf, your bread is going to sit on a cookie sheet, and then above that you want to create like a lid, so either another cookie sheet or a big roasting tray, or it depends on what you have. So that's creating that environment that it needs to cook in. So you preheat your oven. I preheat mine to 250 degrees Celsius. We're in New Zealand here, but I think my oven's a little bit broken. It's quite old. My husband is an appliance technician, so it's kind of funny really. But so that mine being at 250 degrees, Yours might only need to be at 220 or 230 degrees. It really does depend, and it takes some trial and error to figure it out. But it does need to be significantly hot, and we preheat our pans in the oven. As we preheat the oven, they have to be really, really hot, otherwise your bread just won't be very happy. Some other equipment, you can use Banneton baskets for shaping it. I've got just a couple up here on this shelf. So once your bread has finished its bulk rise on day 2, the day that you mix it all up, you need to shape it, and then it goes into the fridge overnight in a container. So I actually use just a basic plastic container, and I line it with an old towel, clean, very, very clean towel, but an old towel. And so the bread sits in there. This has to be very well floured, otherwise the bread will stick to it. You can use a tea towel, don't use a paper towel, that would be awful, but yeah, some kind of cloth. Another thing you need, you absolutely do need some good scales. Digital scales are the best, but you'll be weighing it. We work in grams, or if you're in America, you might work in ounces. However, we use the metric system. So I don't do 100 mils of water and 100 grams of flour. It's 100 grams of water. So I weigh that, and it keeps everything really consistent. Another thing that you need to do before your loaves go in the oven is they need to be scored. It needs a good slice across the top. I will go into the technique of that. So most people use what is called a lamb. This is mine, and it's got a razor in it. And I was gifted this. It's really beautiful. But before I got this, I had just bought some disposable razors, not disposable, reusable razors, the ones that just have a blade on one side. Otherwise, just a really good, strong, sharp knife to give a good slice. You don't want to be tugging at it or anything like that. It's just got to be a quick across the top. Everything is relatively adaptable when it comes to equipment. I say just get into it. We are not going to get things perfect from the first day, but if you go through the process, then you at least understand what needs to happen. You might get a good loaf, but what I found, it took me quite a few attempts until I got some consistent results, and that's all part of the learning process. Okay, so here I am in my very messy kitchen, first thing in the morning, still in my pajamas, and we are going to mix up some sourdough. So here's the recipe. Feel free to screenshot in 3, 2, 1. There you go. That's what I'll be following today to make 2 loaves. I'll actually be making 3. I lie. I'll be making 3, but you can turn yours into 2. So first off is 600 grams of, I'm using a high-grade white flour, as you can see in the writing, 427 grams of water, and followed by 150 grams of the starter that we activated last night before we went to bed. 12 grams of salt, do not forget the salt, and now we're going to mix it all together. For future reference though, it is best to mix the water and the starter together first, because I just find it happens to combine more consistently. Alright, we're going to wet a cloth down, cover it, and come back in 30 minutes. So what's left of the starter that I didn't use, it's going back in the fridge. Now my jar is getting a little bit full, not overly full. You just need to leave a little bit behind each time so that you've got enough left to make up another batch. When I have enough, I make it into pancakes. Alright, so I spent the last 30 minutes getting dressed, got my apron on. I actually made this. I might do a video on how to make it if anyone wants that. You know, I've got the dishwasher on, I've got the washing machine on, I wiped my kitchen benches. It's real happy times here. I'm just gonna to the voiceover. Okay, here we're going to start our first lot of stretch and fold. So first we wet our hands so that our hands don't stick to the dough. That's really important. So you can see our dough here. It's not very well mixed, but it will come together. So you can't pull it up very far without it stretching and starting to rip. This is what happens on the first lot of stretch and folds, but as we go on, you'll see the dough getting stronger. So you lift it up and you fold it over itself and rotate the bowl 90 degrees, lift and fold. Be gentle, try not to rip that dough until you get almost too much resistance and the dough is starting to form itself into like a ball here. Alright, so that is the second timer that has gone off. So it's been another 20 minutes. So we had it, when we mixed it up, we rested it for 30 minutes. And then we set the timer for 20 minutes. And here we are. Those timings can vary. Sometimes I leave the first one for an hour. Sometimes it's 15 minutes. You know, you're going to get slightly different results. But as I said, it's better just getting into it, getting into your day, and making it work for you. So what we're doing here, the stretch and folds, that is going to strengthen it, but we can't do too much at once because that will end up ripping the gluten, because it gets to a certain point where it needs to rest again. You know, we all need to rest in between busyness. So to do stretch and folds, I always wet my hands first. Always, always, always. Each time you do it, the dough will feel a bit more like stretchy. Do you see that? It turns into more like a bubblegum texture instead of like a shaggy dough, which is what we started with. Okay, so you do that and you rotate it. If you rip it, that's not good. Don't try rip it. If you have little tear marks, slow down, ease off. So I'm just rotating the bowl about 90 degrees each time. And again. Okay, so I've got a tiny, tiny little rip in here. Ooh, that's not a good angle. But what I see is that's where there's a little bit of starter that wasn't quite mixed in. So something that I could have done when I mixed up my bread is mix the starter and the water first and then add the flour. And that way it's going to be way more, you know, mixed through. And don't forget the salt. Yeah, so you're meant to do that about 4 times, because what you can see here is it's kind of tensing up. It's not stretching so much. And it's a nice little ball. So we're going to let that rest for another 20 minutes and then we'll come back to it. And we do that, I'll probably do it 4 times today. Sometimes I only do it twice, honestly. As I said, it's just about fitting it in with your day. And yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been an hour and I have forgotten about it. And I come back and do it then. Like, it's all good. It's not about perfection. It's about getting our hands dirty, getting into it. Okay, I've mixed up my apple cider vinegar. That is irrelevant to this. Now we are doing some more stretch and folds. The video is sped up. Don't actually move that fast. It will probably rip. But yeah, that is looking really good. I'm quite happy with that. Nice and strong. Good little ball there. Cover it up, tuck it in, and come back to it in 20 minutes. I'm going to do the last stretch and fold and see if I can manage this with one hand just so you can see in here. Look, it's so much stronger. It's holding its strength. I'm tugging on that slightly. Okay, I ripped it a little bit, but it's okay. There's bubbles. All right, so we're going to do that. And it is getting so much stronger. I'm going to put the phone down because I can't do this with one hand very well. Finish it from this perspective. I have got a tripod on the way so that hopefully I can set my phone up in some good places so that I can record better. There's a test you can do called a window pane test where you kind of pull on it. Now I can see the light through here, but it hasn't ripped. So that's pretty good. It's not super duper strong just yet, but I'm okay with that. I'm pretty happy with how it is. And so from here, I'm going to let it do what is called a bulk rise. And that is where we let it sit and rise. You want to be gentle not to push all of that air out of it, but it's smooth and it's happy and it's getting stronger. It takes a few goes for you to get an eye for it. And we're gonna let it, we want it to grow by 50%. So not double, because that would be growing by 100%. So you want it to just grow like an extra little bit. At this point, however, if I was going out this afternoon, so it's currently 11 o'clock, as I said, this was the most hands-on part, I would put something over this, like a beeswax wrap or a wet tea towel or a plastic bag. I try not to use Glad wrap, but you know, and I'd put that in the fridge overnight, and that would mimic my bulk rise, but it would slow it down. So when it's in the fridge, everything is slowed down. So what we can do on the bench in 2, 3, 4 hours, it can happen in the fridge over 12 to 24 hours. Check your fridge temperature. If it's too warm in the fridge, it shouldn't be too warm in the fridge, but if it is, it might rise a little bit quickly. But anyway, we're going to do the traditional method where we do the bulk rise on the bench. It's going to sit for a couple hours, and then we're going to check on it soon.
Okay, so I promised the boys pancakes, so pancakes is what I'm making. Here I am making some pancakes. Yum, yum. Make a pancake, make a pancake. Okay, now it's time for the pre-shape. In all honesty, this has gone slightly too far. Life happened, children needed me, and it fermented just a little bit too long. It's not too far gone. That dent bounces back up a little bit. That means it's okay. But yeah, in an ideal situation, I would have been doing this process just a little bit sooner. Okay, what I'm using here, that green thing, is called a dough scraper. And it's really handy. I would recommend getting one. See how that dough is just a little bit sticky? It's just slightly runny. It's not too far, but this is definitely not my best work. I will be completely transparent and honest with you all here. It's kind of spilling and losing shape a little bit. It is not too far gone, but it's not my best work. Okay, so we're going to use this, pull the dough onto itself. We're going to turn it into a little bit of a ball. It will make it easier to work with. And so this is going to form like almost a skin on the outside, and make the whole thing just a bit easier to handle. So then we're going to slice it. I'm slicing mine into 3 because I prefer my loaves quite small. But you can absolutely slice yours into 2 loaves for that recipe. I think that would be quite an adequate size. And 2 loaves, working with more than 2 loaves at a time can be quite tricky. Okay, so I'm making sure they're all relatively even. One is slightly smaller, but I wanted the other 2 to be spot on. Okay. So now each of these, we are going to shape it into a bit of a ball. Again, as I said, this part is the pre-shape. So we're forming it into a ball. See how I'm pushing it across and pulling it back towards myself. Pushing it across, pulling it back. I haven't used any flour. You do not need flour for this part because you want the dough to stick to the bench or you won't be able to shape it. And we're forming almost a skin on the outside of that ball. And that's what makes it easier to handle. You can touch that without it completely sticking to you, without it falling apart. So that is ball 1. And we'll do that for each of the other 2 balls as well. We'll set them aside and they rest like that for 15 minutes, but minimum 5. Okay, so let's roll that, push it across the bench and pull it back towards yourself. It takes a few times to get a feel for this, and you can absolutely just use your hand if you don't have a dough scraper. And pull, you want to get some tension on there. Do you see how that is pulling some tension in there? You want that skin on the outside. That is what's going to help your loaves to have a really good shape. A good pre-shape is a foundational part of shaping your loaf well. So 3rd one, push it back, roll it in towards yourself. Just keep using your hands. So my hands are not wet for this process, and I have not used flour. So there we go, at least 5 minutes. It needs to rest, the gluten needs to rest before we can shape it. All right, our dough, you can see how the balls have kind of flattened and rested a bit, and we're going to give it a light sprinkle of flour. So the gluten has relaxed a little bit. That's why we let it rest for 15. A light sprinkle of flour. See, this is the first time I'm using flour. I'm not putting heaps of it on the bench, just a little bit, that hand says. Yeah, we're not covering the bench. You can have a bowl of flour and just sprinkle it with your hands. I like using this flour shaker. I find it extremely convenient. And I was gifted that for a birthday present, and it's really handy. I think it's meant for like chocolate powder on drinks or something, or I don't know, but this is what I use it for. And some sesame seeds on a plate. I do a mix of white sesame and black sesame, so we can roll the dough balls once they're shaped into it. So here we are. We did the pre-shape just before, we rested it, and now we are shaping the dough. So the flour side is going to tip onto the bench. And we're going to be very gentle, so that sticky side up. So do not flour this bit. We need that nice and sticky so that it can stick to itself. If there's too much flour, then your dough won't really hold together. So we're going to rotate. We're going to fold that. So basically into thirds, so that comes across just past the middle. And then the other side is going to fold onto itself. And this is how we're going to shape our loaves. You can't just roll it. You kind of need to, like, you know, I can't really explain why we do this. It makes sense in my head. Okay, 90-degree turn. We're going to now roll it towards ourselves while pressing it slightly away, but you don't want to press all the air out of it. You just want to create that skin, that surface tension on the outside. And then we're going to press the ends in so that they don't kind of spill out everywhere. So press in both ends. As you can see, you'll see me do this with each loaf. These cloths are, I usually have all of the bigger white cloths, as you can see to my left, but this is all I had today, so this is what I'm going to use. I've got a tiny container here. This is a very small loaf, but the container is actually still just a bit small. I'm just wanting to make a couple mini loaves this week for practicality reasons. It's what worked for my family, but yeah, so we're going to flip it. So the bottom is going to face the top, so that when we flip it out of these containers tomorrow, that it's the top side up. So it's going in upside down, it's a little belly sticking up. We want to get that into that container nicely. It'll sink down a little bit as it sits there. And happy as. That's going to sit in the fridge like that overnight. Yeah, a little bit of flour around those edges actually is quite helpful. Now for the flour, I've just got my standard white flour. Many people use rice flour or even corn flour, not corn flour as in that really funny textured, almost icing sugar looking flour. I guess I mean corn meal, the quite gritty, very yellow flour that they would probably use for making like corn chips and stuff like that. Anyway, next loaf, the floured side is down on the bench, sticky side up. Gently pull that out into almost a rectangular shape. This loaf is slightly bigger than the last one. Fold it to the middle, so folding that into thirds, as you can see, so just past the middle, sorry. Pressing those edges out. See, there's too much flour on this right-hand edge, and so it hasn't stuck down very well, but that's okay. We carry on and fold the other side up. Rotate 90. See, I'm pressing that down again. It wasn't sticking. So if you put too much flour on it, you will have that problem yourself. Okay, roll it back towards myself. Yep, that was rather sticky, that one. Watch out for that guy. Keep rolling, rolling, rolling. Yeah, as you can see. Tuck those sides down. See, I did a different kind of tucking method on the side there. I am not the most technical when it comes to shaping. Flour that cloth. Flour it up real good. You don't want it to flour that last one. That last cloth is ridiculously small. It's not really doing the job. I got behind on my washing and I don't have the right cloths this week. But anyway, we're going to put sesame seeds on this one. So we flipped it. so that its little belly button's going to be sticking up, sesame seeds on its back, and it is kind of falling apart, I'll be honest. This is not my best work. But here we are, and we're doing this thing. And I'm going to be putting both of my loaves into this container. Usually I just do one loaf in the container. It's going to relax, and it's going to fill out to the size of the space you give it. And so for the shape of the loaves that I like, this is how I do it. Okay, last loaf, floured side on the bench, sticky side facing up. Fold it just past the middle. Press that down a little bit. And then fold the other third back onto itself, rotate 90 degrees and roll towards you. This makes what's called batards. If you want a boule is a round loaf. A batard is the more longer oval shaped loaf. Not a baguette. That's different again. I haven't made baguettes. Push those sides in. Yeah, so we're making batards here, which is more, I guess, the most traditional kind of sourdough. I like it. I find the shape easier for cutting, for slicing up as toast, for storing, all of those things. Okay, a little roll in the sesame, onto the ridiculously small cloth, you know. Like, I don't know why she thinks she can fit into that. She cannot fit that outfit. Okay. Don't be judgy, Mel. So yeah, that's going into the container too. A little bit of tweaking. It didn't quite fit perfectly. Don't waste those seeds. So they're going in there. They can be down the sides of it. They'll look beautiful anyway. So fold that over. Get it sitting in there nice and comfy wumpy. And you kind of want to cover it up a bit because you don't want it drying out in the fridge overnight. I'm a bit concerned about the edge there. The dough is almost touching the container. Oh, here I am, what's called stitching. So if you want a bit more surface tension on the outside to keep the shape better, you pull the edges of the, like I just did. You saw what I did. Okay, flour goes on, cloths go over, and here I am looking for a bag. I'm going to look in every cupboard before I realize it was on the bench right beside me. But here we go. We'll keep looking. We'll look in this drawer. We'll look in that drawer. We'll look up. We'll look down. But there we go. Oh, I already had it. Thanks, past Mel, for being so organized. So these bread bags, I keep these bread bags every week. We do buy standard sandwich bread often. I am only human and I cannot bake everything that we consume. But wrap it up, tuck the end in, and it's happy. Good night. So once the dough was in the fridge, I was able to have some time on my guitar, make the bed, do the dishes. We did get interrupted with some injuries and a little bit of a workout in there before someone else got injured, but they were fine. And then time to whip up some slice, an entire block of butter in that slice. It makes quite a decent amount. So I cooked that today and I put it in the fridge overnight and slice it up tomorrow. Quick check on the garden before dinner time, and then a nice little family outing before bed. Morena friends, how are we all doing today? So it is day 3, which means it's baking day. So as you can see, I haven't even touched the bread yet, it's still in the fridge, but we have preheated the oven to 250 degrees with the pans in there so they can get nice and hot too. I'm using 2 pans at the same time. If you just have one, you just do the bread one after the other. And I have set the oven so that it is preheating for at least 30 minutes. 40 minutes is probably best. So once that's up to temp, we are going to get our bread dough out of the oven. No, Mel. We're going to get it out of the fridge and I will show you what to do and how to get them into the oven safely, and we will bake. Okay, I've got 3 sheets of baking paper. I reuse baking paper, so these ones had cookies on them yesterday. But I'm going to get my dough out of the
well, I've got it out of the fridge. I'm going to put it onto the sheet. So I flip it upside down. Remember, we put them in those containers upside down. So now we just need to flip it right side up again so that it's facing the correct way. So we had its belly buttons facing out of the container. Now its belly buttons need to be facing down onto the baking sheets. And so I've got my pots out of the oven. I've just quickly scored that. Sorry you missed that, but you're going to watch the other two anyway. So open that, nice and ready. Just a gentle score across it. Not too deep, on a nice angle, but right across the length of it. Put the lid on, drop the lid, put it back on again, pop it in the oven, set the timer for 30 minutes. See you in a moment. Okay, so we've just put our bread into the oven. And it's going to be in there with the lids on for 30 minutes. And then we are going to remove the lids and let the loaves cook for another 5 or so minutes. When I shaped my loaves, when I just scored them right now, they were starting to kind of relax quite a lot. That's an indication that I let it sit, ferment for the bulk rise for just a little bit too long. We'll see how they turn out. As I said, it's not going to be perfect. You can aim for getting it closer and closer to perfection, but we're still going to have some really good bread. Okay, the oven has beeped. It's been 30 minutes and we're going to see how they are.
Yeah, these cats are helping.
Oh, that is looking pretty good. And then the other ones. Pop that back in so that the top can crisp up. Let's check out these guys. Pretty good. They actually need a little bit longer covered up though. Okay, so my loaves are out of the oven. There's some good things about them. These are not my best loaves. I will yeah, I'm going to be honest. There's a tiny little ear, that little flicker. I would love that to be a little bit bigger. It's going to be a lovely loaf. There's little blisters on here that you can almost pop them. They're a really good sign too. So I'm pretty happy. It's going to be delicious. One thing I will not do again is put 2 loaves in one pan. Definitely 1 loaf per pan. That was just something I was trying this week to see if I could cook more at a time. But what has happened there is this side hasn't cooked very well. See, that's nice and rounded, whereas this is where the 2 loaves were kind of stuck together a little bit. So that part wasn't the best. It's gonna be delicious. And then this one, where it's open there, that is good. Pretty good. I think I fermented it just slightly too long. This was a recipe I haven't done for a while. I haven't done an all white bread loaf for a long time. So as you can see, it's not always perfect, but I am looking forward to eating these and sharing these. They're not all for me. Yeah, so I would love to see how you go making your own loaves, and happy baking. And one last thing before we cut into our loaf, we want it to cool down completely. So I say minimum 3 hours after getting it out of the oven before you slice it. If you slice it while it's still warm, it's going to change the structure of it. It's going to go a little bit soggy and stodgy. Whereas if you wait for it to cool down, when you slice it, it'll be nice and fluffy and the way that it was meant to be. As I said, I wait minimum 3 hours, but I usually wait at least 12 hours, if not overnight. That seems to be the best window to enjoy it. I know it can be very tempting though. So do your best and try and wait. Trust me, it'll be worth it.